Okay, great. Great. Good evening and welcome to the West Orange Board of Education special public board meeting on today, November 7th, 2022. I would like to thank all of you here in person and those who are watching from home, who are joining us tonight. Thank you for being with us. I would also like to welcome my fellow board members and as well as Ms. Flowers and Dr. Schoen, who is attending remotely. Hi, Dr. Schoen. And she's recovering from some extensive foot surgery she has. So we wish her well in her recovery and look forward to having her back in person with us soon. Ms. Flowers, would you be able to take the roll call for us?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Roll call. Ms. Huerta.
Here.
Mr. Rock.
Here.
Mr. Stevenson.
Here.
Vice President Rothstein.
Here.
President Tunnicliffe.
Here.
Thank you. Notice of meeting. Please take notice that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided in the following manner: that a written notice was sent from the Office of the Secretary of the Board at 4 p.m. on October 5th, 2022. That said notice was sent by regular mail to the West Orange Township Clerk and the editors of the West Orange Chronicle and the Star Ledger. That said notice was posted in the lobby of the Administration Building of the Board of Education. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Flowers. We will now begin with petitions and hearings of citizens on agenda and non-agenda items. Any community member who would like to make comments or ask questions, you may come to the lectern at this time. Please state your name and address for the record, and then you may begin your comments. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. If there's any members of the public here who wish to speak, I see no one, so we will move right along. Next, we will have our state assessment presentation by Ms. Ebony DeMendez, and who's our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, and Ms. Michelle Martino, who is our Director of Assessment, Accountability, and Intervention. So I will pass it over to you now. Wires there.
Good evening. So this evening, we will be presenting on our spring 2022 state assessment data. Before I do begin, let's see how this works here. Am I pressing the right button? I'm just probably pressing the wrong button. No, I'll press here.
Sorry. Oh. It's long. There you go. The over arrow.
Okay, we're ready. We're presenting our state assessment presentation. While I will be presenting on spoken word, Ms. Michelle Martino, my esteemed colleague here, certainly was invaluable at all of the data and the presentation that you're seeing today, and in helping me put it together, as well as my colleagues in our content area supervisors who inform all of the interventions and strategies here in this presentation. Our board members, thank you for meeting with us this week, as you also gave us feedback. You will see that integrated here. At our teachers who also have been unpacking this data with the content area supervisors and did also contribute to this, and our principals. So this is a team representation of not only what we're planning to address the data, but it will and most urgently require the entire team and the collaboration of the entire district to make sure that we're making the gains that are necessary this evening. So I'm going to begin with our New Jersey State Assessment Program, just an overview of where we have been for the past 3 years. We understand that state assessments have been suspended for the past 2 years in 2019-20 and 2020-21. In 2019-20, we were virtual in March, that's the red. In 2020-21, we came back mid-January, and there was still optional virtual settings that were in place. And then in 2020-21, which was last year, was our first year back, full year in person. And this is the year that we tested our students. So that was the spring of last year that students were assessed. This evening, we're going to go over the NJSLA, which is the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment in ELA and Math, grades 3 through 9, the Algebra 1, 2, and Geometry and Science for grades 5, 8, and 11. Also, the Access for ELS, this is the assessment that is given for our English language learners in grades K through 12. And then just a brief snapshot into the dynamic learning map for grade 3, while other students are tested at other grade levels. That's not represented here tonight because those groups are less than 10. And when we have students that are testing that are less than 10, then that is an identifiable piece of data that's not shown in the public presentation. Our NJSLA for spring 2022 is reported out at varying performance levels. And so then these are the levels, level 1 being students who did not yet meet expectations, level 5, those who exceeded expectations. And then in the middle, that's level 3. And there are the students who are approaching. They're right at the cusp. They are approaching meeting the standards. And so then we include those students in our data sets as well. Okay. When we begin, we're beginning with English language arts. This is a description of what the ELA assesses. There are 3 major tasks: literary analysis task, the short passage set, and the research simulation task. This is what the assessment emphasizes: closed reading, synthesis of ideas, determining the meanings of words, writing effectively. And each student analyzes these passages on an assessment, and they produce work in the areas of reading and writing. When we look at our NJSLA Spring 2022 for grades 3 to 5, we are required to report out on a state and district comparison. So we see that our grade 3 students are at 51.5% proficiency, our grade 4 at 60.1, our grade 5 at 57.3. And for the purpose of accountability, we are exceeding the state in all areas. However, we do understand that there are students here who are not meeting the standards. And so then you will hear this evening about the interventions that we have in place, the instructional strategies that need to be held and implemented in order to account for all of our students. There is an additional group of students that are right there at the cusp. So in addition to our 51.5 in grade 3 that are demonstrating meeting or exceeding the standards, there's an additional 22.6, for example, that are right there at the cusp of proficiency. And that's how we would potentially look at these data, how we would consider the groups of students that we work with to move them into proficiency, but also at the exceeded area, you'll see how many students are above the standard. We want to move students from met into exceeded, right? So we're looking at addressing the needs of our students who have to meet proficiency while also extending learning for our advanced students, moving them from met into exceeded. Here are the data by subgroups. Here is grades 3, 4, 5. These reflect our students with disabilities, our economically disadvantaged students in blue, and our English language learners in yellow. These are our subgroups, and these are the subgroups by ethnicity. I think important to notice here is that we often look at our subgroup data and we're thinking about if there are gaps across subgroups, if we're looking at the needs of these very specialized populations and how to address them. I think what we want to also see is that the students on the left, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, and English language learners are also the students on the right. So these students are counted in multiple groups, all right? So every student who is an English language learner also falls into a race or ethnicity. And so then you'll see that student represented across multiple areas. For example, here we're exceeding the state in every area except Hispanic in grades 4 and 5. When we look at our Hispanic students, though, we notice that of the 4th grade, as the example, Hispanic students, 28% are students with disabilities. So they're also in that column. 55% are economically disadvantaged. So they're also in that column. And 13% are English language learners. Why do we have to look at the data this way? Because we have to understand who are these students, right? When we're addressing gaps across subgroups, we have to look at what are the characteristics that are common. And then, for example, if they're English language learners, which conversely, 83% of the L's are Hispanic, then we know that we're working with them on language acquisition. We're working with them on learning English as we are moving toward proficiency in ELA and math. And so then by unpacking the subgroup data this way, we're able to really see the need and see the strategies that can be applied to promoting and improving student learning. In grade 5, you do see a bar that's missing, and that's because in that group there are less than 10 Asian students, and so therefore they're not represented in this data set. So when we're thinking about ELA, the data breaks it out by cluster area. On this slide there, you will see our 5 areas that students are assessed in: vocabulary, literary analysis, informational text, written expressions, and writing conventions. So these are the 5 cluster areas in ELA. The numbers here represent the percentage of students that are meeting or exceeding the expectations in that cluster by grade level. So for example, if we look at written expressions and we see that 64% of our 5th grade students and 62% of our 5th grade students in writing conventions are meeting or exceeding those standards, we see that might be a strength in grade 5 writing. On the other side, we see that vocabulary has a lower percentage. So then we're zooming into vocabulary. We're saying, how are we going to support learning in the area of vocabulary? Literary analysis, for example, grade 5, you might see as a strength here on this slide that says that they are able to describe how a narrator's or a speaker's point of view influences how events are described. But then when I move into the area of focus, which is an area for our instruction that we need to really work with our students on, it's analysis of multiple counts of the same topic, noting similarities or differences. So by really taking a look at the data, examining our evidence statements, examining what students are able to do, what students need greater support in, where our instruction really needs to harness the need of the student, and or move them toward advanced levels of proficiency. Our teachers are working alongside the supervisors to unpack the data and be able to very clearly identify the need. Here, it's an important piece of data because as we talked about, our assessments were suspended for 2 years. So therefore, we don't have that historical look back for the past 3 years, which is normally how we go, right? We look at the past 3 years of data to say, are we growing? In the absence of that data and knowing we have about 55 to 60% students proficiency in ELA, we have the other remaining students who are 22% at the cusp or 30 at the cusp, but then we have the students who are not. What are we doing to help those students? We can't wait for the state assessment to come every year, right? Or for it to be suspended for that matter. And, things can happen. So we also administer district assessments or formative assessments so that we can say right now, we have a need. Right now, what are we going to do? Right now, with the same sense of urgency, how are we going to help our students improve? So here's the Fontes and Pinnell, which is our reading benchmark assessment. It is administered 3 times a year. It is administered in the fall, it is administered in the winter, and it is administered in the spring. And what we're able to do is we're able to gauge a student's improvement, their growth as compared to self. This more readily is available to teachers as data that can be used to inform instruction directly in the classroom. All right. So when we're thinking about these reading levels, we broke them down also to cohort performance. What does this mean? This is the same group of students being monitored 1 year after another to see how they're growing compared to self. So if I start at the bottom, our current 5th grade students, the ones who are sitting with us right now, in 2021, they were 57.2% were proficient. In 2000, that's coming right after the closures, right? So there we see evidence of learning loss. But then 1 year in person, they're at 67.3. That's a gain of 17.6% as compared to self. We see an even stronger grade gain with 1 year back, right? In 4th grade, 51.3% moving to 67.1% for gains of 31%. Similar pattern in grade 3. 50.5 in 21, they've increased to 72.9% in 22, 44.4% gains. And then we see our current 2nd grade, modest gains there. Important to note is that our current 2nd grade was in virtual instruction in kindergarten. There's that foundational year, and then half of their 1st grade year. So I just want to really show this here data to say that while we have our NJSLA data, that's one snapshot for the spring, even though we don't have the prior year's data, we have formative assessment data throughout the district in all content areas where we can really measure student growth as compared to self, number one. Number two, after 1 year of instruction, our teachers are doing an amazing job at really starting to close these gaps, and will continue, right? We have the right people on the bus, right? We have the right people on the bus. They are working feverishly to say, what is it that the students need? How are we improving the instruction? What interventions are we putting in place? And they're meeting with each other across grade levels. We have vertical articulation. Tomorrow is November 8th, our district in service. All of our teachers are coming together to really strategize around what we need to do to improve instruction. Math in particular, grades 6 through 12, our ELA teachers are going to be looking at formative assessments and what kind of data we can get around those formative assessments so that we can really address the learning in the district. In addition to looking at the cohort performance, which is the same group of students over time, we can also look at the grade level performance. So the current grade 3, in 2021, 50.5% were proficient, but looking back to this year, looking forward to 2022, 55.4%. So we could look at that grade level performance as well. Okay, so this is how we can monitor. Our supervisor of ELA at the elementary level, Beatrice Hanratty, working alongside the reading specialists and the teachers, have taken our data. They've identified the areas of strength in reading and the areas of focus. So this is what the teachers will be working on as we're looking to really support our students. Really importantly is how detailed this intervention and the strategies are that are going to be applied. And so then here's a product of what the teachers did last year alongside the reading specialists. And these are if-then strategies. So what we're saying is, for example, if the focus area is phonemic awareness, if the students are struggling in this area specifically with rhyming words, then this is the appropriate intervention to put in place. So here are very specific strategies, very specific interventions that we will put in place, that are being put in place, that are being monitored again frequently in order to determine student growth, not at the end of the year summatively as the NJSLA would suggest, but are 3 times a year every time we administer the FMP. We have this for every grade level, and we have this for every cluster area and every strand. In addition, these are the instructional strategies and intervention that are being put in place district-wide for ELA. You'll notice that behind each strategy, it will be marked, or there's an indication if it's a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 strategy. So a tier 1 strategy is what happens in the classroom. It's in that homeroom classroom, differentiated instruction with the teacher. Tier 2 is now a more intensive strategy. It may be a small group that's pulled out, group 6 to 8 students, where we're working on student needs. And then tier 3 is our most intensive strategy. And that might be a very small group of 3 students. That's where you might find the multisensory learning, LLI, right? Leveled literacy. You'll find some of those very specific strategies for the needs of those students. Here is the work of Ms. Martino and her team as they think about how are we using funding in our grants? How are we using our ESSER $3, our ESSER $2, our ARP money, right? All of the money that we received, and how are we doing that across our academic support programs? So you can see the strategies here. I'm just going to highlight a few. The first one is multi-tiered systems of support. And so then this is really thinking about how are we defining tiered intervention? What does that look like? How do we know which students to work with, right? How are we making sure that they're getting the strategies that they need? We're evaluating the district's intervention program. We're seeing, is it working? Is it not? And in the areas that it's working, then we're going to duplicate that. In the areas that we could require some growth, then we're meeting with our teachers and staff. We have a whole system of coaching that is pushing into the district alongside this group to help our teachers, to provide them with the professional development, to provide them with the coaching, to enter into those conversations. The teachers are on the front line. They're the ones who know what they're seeing with the students, right? And so then they're able to talk with the coaches to say, teachers, what are you seeing? And then the teachers can contribute that, and then we can work on the appropriate strategies to help the students. We're working with Rutgers Center for Literacy and Development, and this is coaches pushing into our schools, co-teaching with the teachers, observing the instruction, debriefing, and really just partnering with our staff so that we can, again, support our students. Sheltered instruction, this is for all of our general education teachers to help them with strategies in their classrooms for our English language learners. This is increasingly a need in our district as our L population increased 20% over last year, and at the middle school closer to 40%. So that's a very significant increase in our ELL population. And so then in addition to ESL, which is a pullout, we want our teachers in the classroom to also have the support they need in order to help our students. AM, PM tutorials, homework clubs, and we're looking at Paper, which is an online tutorial service for grades, actually 4 through 8. So that was English language arts for grades 3 through 5. I'm going to move on to 6 to 9. It'll be a little repetitive, so I'll move a little more quickly through the slides. I took time with these as, you know, it was the first time we're seeing these slides, but now we'll see how that applies into the upper grades. And so then here we have for ELA grades 6, 7, 8, and 9. These are the percentage of students who are meeting or exceeding the expectations across the grades. The met or exceeded column is the addition of meet and exceeded, right? So it's adding them both. So we see our percentage proficiency. We also see the students who are right there at the cusp. They are approaching proficiency. So we would want to consider that percentage in addition to our proficiency percentage as at the cusp for meeting state standards. Again, our subgroup performance here for students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, and our English language learners. Also, in this data set, we do see that we are exceeding the state in all areas except for our Hispanic and our African American students in grades 6, 7, and 9. Again, just for an idea of what that means, where do the students duplicate? For grade 6, for example, our African American students, 23% are also in the students with disabilities cluster. 32% are also in economically disadvantaged. And when we reverse it, we see that 41% of our African American population is a student with a disability. So here is where we would push into our IEPs, where we would push into our audits and say, you know, how are students being classified? Is there disproportionate proportionality, what are we doing about that as well? So these are all things that we need to study. We are studying and addressing in the district. For SLA, ELA grades 6 through 9, here are the cluster areas. We've talked about how these percentages represent the grade levels and the percentage meeting or exceeding. Here are the strengths that are listed, and here are the areas of focus. Just for our public, this presentation will be posted on our district website, and so then everyone will have the opportunity to really sit down and go bullet by bullet and or analyze the data as you see fit. A note for here, there are areas of strength and focus in reading and writing that are similar. And the reason is that on the assessments, the students may be presented with a text and then have to write about the text, right? And so then that's why you may see some duplication of strategies. Here are just some examples of instructional strategies and interventions by cluster. And so then if the state is reporting out by cluster on the NJSLA, then we want to design interventions and strategies that are specific to those. So for example, when we're thinking about vocabulary, literary analysis, and informational text, here's an example of some interventions and strategies for our students. We're saying when a character does something that contrasts with what you'd expect or contradicts his earlier acts or statements, stop and ask, why is the character doing that? So here's a strategy of, that mental model and how we're thinking in our mind and how we're helping the students really think about what they're reading as they're looking for evidence from a text. Also, our thoughts, how to formulate questions in our mind that really are around that text, the questions we would ask of the text, and then how we would analyze that text in a more meaningful way in order to be able to wrap ourselves around the standards. And then lastly, here's an example of a summary of what not to do, right, when we're looking at textual evidence. And what we should do. What does that look like? So that we're weaving in strategies for how to respond to these different types of texts and questions. Here are some curricular and programmatic strategies and interventions for ELA at the secondary level. I'm going to just highlight a few. Our Common Lit benchmarks, these are new. They started last year. And again, it's in line with the F&P, the reading assessment. It's saying instead of waiting for the summative assessment at the end of the year, we need to monitor regularly, frequently. So in the fall, in the winter, in the spring, we're administering the Common Lit benchmark so we can see how the students are performing and then address that intervention immediately, not at the end of a year. It's too late. We've made revisions to our middle school curriculum and our high school curriculum for explicit teaching points, and we are also implementing a writing center at the high school, which is very well populated, by the way. We've already talked about these interventions. They are similar, but they are specific to the grade span. And new to ELA is the middle school academic support. This is, I think, 2 years in. Again, we weren't here for part of that. So now we're able to really see how this is going to help. We've had academic support at our younger grades. In elementary, we called it basic skills. We're switching our language, right? But we did not have it at the middle school. So here we're starting to work with our middle school students for intervention. I'm going to move on to math for grades 3 through 5. These are the areas that are assessed in math. The components are number and operations in base 10, fractions, operations and algebraic thinking, measurement and data, and geometry. And so then here is the performance of our students in comparison to the state. Again, met or exceeded is at ranging between the 45 and the 53%. We do have an additional 27 to 31% who are approaching the standards. And we have the balance of the students who are not, who need to be supported and addressed. Here is the subgroup population. I don't need to repeat it because it's the same as for ELA, right? It's the same group of students taking both assessments, ELA and math. So those data would be very similar. And then we've identified strengths by clusters. And so then this is lengthy. I certainly won't read through it. I think the important thing to know here is that by grade level and by cluster, we're able to really take a look at the data, identify what the strengths are, identify what the students' needs are, and more importantly, the areas of focus for our curriculum, for our instruction, for our intervention, for our strategies, and for our multi-tiered systems of support. When we're addressing all of those areas in the system, to include the professional development for our staff, then we're able to look at improvement at scale. Additional interventions and strategies for our students based off of the cluster area. This will be online for those who might be joining, right? So that you can see specifically what the strategies are by cluster area, and then district-wide, what are the strategies? These range from small group instruction based on formative assessment data, our math coach that we've embedded into our staff to support our staff, our professional development on learning acceleration. So we need to speed it up. We can't wait and make small gains from year to year. We have to make significant gains from year to year. And so then how are we going to accelerate the learning? In order to do that, we need to identify prerequisite gaps. And so then a student is coming into a unit of study, but what is the prior knowledge that student may not have? So we want to embed that into the curriculum and into that unit so we can teach to the prior knowledge that's needed and address the grade level content at the appropriate level of rigor. And I think that's critical to our learning as we unpack data too. And it's just making sure that we're teaching at the appropriate levels of rigor, the appropriate level of depth, and it's not just coverage. We're moving into our math 6-8 data with algebra 1, 2, and geometry. And so then here I am going to pause and just take a look at our nation at a glance. On this slide at the very top in black, you'll see all of our states represented across the United States. And so what the data shows here is that our nation as a whole took a very sharp decline in math grades 6 to 8, algebra 1, algebra 2. And of course, you know, here we are looking at the effects of the school closures. And so in addition to the fact that everyone took a dip or a very sharp decline in math at the middle school level, New Jersey in particular took a sharper decline by 11 points. And so then here's New Jersey. How do I read this map? The dark blue dot at the top is where everyone in the nation was in 2019 pre-pandemic. And then the light blue dot at the bottom shows where every state went to after. And so you see that New Jersey went down sharply. However, you'll see that we started at the top. We were the third in the nation anyway, right? So our decline is sharp. It still has us ahead of the other states. More importantly, where is West Orange? And what are we going to do about West Orange? I preface this because our data is very difficult here in math 6-8. We know that New Jersey 8th graders had one of the sharpest, even though they remained about the same in reading. It was in math, according to the NAEP, only a third of New Jersey's 8th graders were proficient in math compared to 26% nationwide. And the greatest impact was for our low-income students and our minority students in New Jersey, specifically those high poverty districts and our Black and Hispanic and our English language learners. So we know that this was the greatest impact. Why in math? Because math instruction is so linear, right? It's linear. It's based on that prior knowledge, that prerequisite knowledge. When we're home learning, we can read, we can watch our, get into our books. Our support is there, but we might not dig into that pre-algebra the same way. And so then this is the effect that it's had nationwide. And so then we join the state in our performance here, or our nation. We see our scores are at 32.7% in grade 6, grade 7, 19.9, and grade 8 at 11%. In our district, this data really doesn't represent a true picture for our 7th and 8th grade students. I do want to point that out. And the reason that is 120 students had to be pulled out of this grade 7 number here because they took algebra 1. So once you pull those students out, then this is the balance. And our grade 8 students as well, we pulled 160 65 students out of this data set because they're in Algebra 1, 2, or geometry courses. And so therefore, this Math 7-8 data, there's an asterisk there because it doesn't truly represent the grade level performance. Here are the students who are approaching meeting the standard as in the other slides. And then here is our Algebra 1, 2, and geometry performance. The students who are approaching or meeting the standards here. Important to note that in Math 6, 7, 8, and Algebra 1, there's about 400 to 500 students being tested. In Algebra 2, there's only 169 students in this group and an even lower number in geometry. So that's just important statistically. So when we're looking at our data to understand. Our subgroups. And by race and ethnicity. So as our Secretary of State said, right, these data aren't acceptable, pandemic or not. We need to find out where we're going, what we're doing, how we're going to help our students, how we're going to close the gaps that we are observing in our data, and how we're going to work together as a district to make that happen. Here are the strengths that we do see in our data. And then here are the areas of focus. This is 6 to 8 math. Here are the strengths in Algebra 1, 2, and geometry. And then here are our areas of focus. So math, this is our critical area. This is the area that, you know, we as our superintendents would say, we got this, right? We're going to really continue to press into our math and our students. So tomorrow, all of our math teachers are coming together, grades 6 through the geometry. They're all coming together to unpack the data, to go through the evidence statements, to go through iReady diagnostic data. And I think this is a very important intervention and tool that we're bringing into the district. So for the past 2 years, we've had iReady data. We'll be able to use it at scale this year since we're here. And this really gives us very specific to the strand, what is the need of the student, whether, again, if the student is a student who is needing to meet proficiency or that advanced student who we want to extend their learning, right? But this is the specific strand, and this is the specific need. Here is the intervention. Here is the lesson plan, teacher, and here is where to find it in your curriculum. All right. So this data is going to be much more meaningful to us for making the gains that we need to make. All right. So all of the teachers coming together tomorrow to begin to really unpack these data, delve into the iReady data, look at what needs to happen in each classroom, implement the strategies, and then along with our supervisors and lead teachers, really think about how we're going to progress monitor our improvement every 6 to 8 weeks. All right, not waiting to the end of the year. Our high school has Delta Math to that end. And so these vertical articulation meetings are critically important. So what can the board expect? I have this at the end, but I'll put it here now. So as we look to implement these interventions and monitor the progress, we will come back at the end of this year to report out. We're not going to wait until the new SLA data next November, right? We want to know now. And so then we'll be monitoring that every 6 to 8 weeks. And then at the end of this year, we'll be able to come back to the board to say, these are the gains we're making. This is a readjustment of how we're approaching our interventions. And this is what you can expect moving forward. Additional strategies and interventions. There are released items by the NJSLA. I think that's a disadvantage we have in New Jersey, that the assessment is like top secret, right? So we can't look at the assessment results. We can't look at these items unless they're released. So in other states, you can really just see, I got this wrong. What was it? The teacher can look at it, examine it with the student. We can't do that with NJSLA. They release certain items, and so then we will use those released items to really work with our students. And again, additional interventions. Science follows suit with the data. Here is our percentage proficiency in science. The students who are at the cusp, our subgroup performance, our strengths and our areas of focus, our instructional strategies and interventions district-wide. Here I will highlight the project-based assessments, the PBAs. And so then again, how are you measuring progress now? At the end of every unit, a PBA is assessed, right? Assesses student learning. We're looking at those PBAs to really determine what are the needs of the students so that we can make the adjustment, not at the end, but for the next unit, right? So here's how we performed in this very unit. And now let's look at the PBA in order to determine how we're going to make improvement in the very next unit. Here's our access for ELLs, our English language learners. What you see here are the different proficiency levels. These data have to be looked at a little differently, right? This is not the percentage of students meeting or exceeding proficiency. What this is where are you in terms of English? What's your proficiency level in the English language? And so then here at the right, I put in a little chart because it's really just how many students are sitting at the different levels. But more importantly, this is what percentage of students are meeting their own growth targets. All right. So for grade 1, from 1 year to the next, what percentage of students are meeting their own growth targets? We would have 54%. In grade 4, we have 88%. All right. So we're able to again see that those younger grades, those foundational years, kindergarten not being present, are affected. Our higher grades, we're seeing greater gains. We see similar patterns up at our upper levels in the secondary. Again, this is growth compared to self 1 year to the next because the access was administered last year and this year. These are their strategies, strength, areas of focus, instructional strategies and interventions, from the professional development to our fast forward reading programs, after school and ELL literacy nights, the tutorial programs that are embedded, the iReady reading program and resources, the writing center. So we have a host of strategies for our ELLs that are above and beyond the ESL. ESL is the proper instruction, but we also are looking at those multi-tiered systems of support for our English language learners. And then lastly, here are our dynamic learning maps. And so then this assessment is unique. It is for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities for whom general state assessments are not appropriate. So this is the student who cannot sit for the NJSLA due to their disability. We only have 3rd grade data. The others groups were too small. We have a very small number here. And so then these are the strategies for those students. Very specific strategies are written into their IEPs. And here we're working with their child study team, their case manager, and the families to support our students. So what are our next steps? Refine our district goals. We're starting there. We have our district goal for this year is to continue to use data to inform instruction, implement interventions, extended learning opportunities, identify progress monitoring. So we're going to take this baseline data that we've presented this evening. We're going to develop specific and measurable goals in each content. We had this 2 years ago where we said by the end of this year, we want to grow by 10%. And in ELA, we're going to move from 60% proficient to 70 or from 70 to 80. For the past 2 years, we've had a lot of SEL goals, trauma-based goals given our context, but we will take this baseline data now and we will develop very specific measurable district goals so that that accountability is present for us as a district. We are aligning all of our goals to our administrator goals. So all of our administrators have written their goals. They've taken a piece of data. Dr. Schoen has made this a district-wide requirement, right? So every administrator in the district, we have goals to each. And we've identified a specific area of our content area. And then there's a quantitative measure of what does success look like? What does adequate growth in terms of an expectation look like by the end of this year? Teachers do the same thing. Our teachers develop their SGOs and they take a look at their class baseline data and say, what are the expectations by the end of this year? We're going to make that data part of the ongoing cycle of instructional improvement. What are the areas in our instruction that we need to improve in? Teach students how to examine their own data, provide supports that foster that culture of looking at that data, using it to inform our instruction. With the new position of the Director of Assessment, Intervention, Accountability, is such a long name, right? But now we have somebody who can pull all of the data, get it into our principals' hands, get it into our teachers' hands so that they're not spending time trying to develop reports, but now they can just use the data to develop their instruction. So that system-wide approach is very critical to the improvement that we're looking for. Implement frequent and consistent progress monitoring cycles, report on growth as measured by the formative assessment results. All right. And so then I think that's where we are. And I do want to just reiterate, we have a fantastic staff in our administration, in our supervisors of content, and in our teachers. And so then our teachers really are working diligently to say, this is how I can best help my students. How can I rethink this instruction and these interventions, put them in place? So I just want to thank them. At the end of the day, this is, going to be on them working with the students and our content supervisors who are really looking at best practices and research. And just with confidence, we can do this. We can make the improvements that we need. We're confident in that. We know what we need to do. Our work is cut out for us. It's challenging, but I don't think it's impossible. It's something that together as a district will come together and we'll make it happen for our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grotisa. And thank you, Ms. De Mendez and Ms. Martino, for that comprehensive presentation. This past week, Ms. De Mendez and Ms. Martino presented this presentation to each of the board members, along with Dr. Schoen, as well as all of our principals. And the board had an opportunity to discuss the presentation as well as ask some follow-up questions. As a board, we're very appreciative of the time you spent with us last week and the willingness for both of you to incorporate many of the suggestions that the board had as parent and board members from our perspective. With that said, I will ask if there are any comments or additional questions that any of you may have. And if so, you can state those now. Anyone? No?
Just a really quick seconding of the thank you. It's in a lot of ways difficult news to hear, but the bright spot for me is when I started on the board almost 3 years ago, we were talking a lot about data, about preparing us to be a district that collects data and is prepared to take action based on the data and not based on feelings about what might be going on. And so what I see in this presentation is no running from the facts, just the reality of where we're at and the plan in incredible detail about how we're going to use data to zero in and target on the areas where we can make improvements. So both of those are taken to heart, and I just really appreciate the work that all of you in the district are doing to help propel us forward and improve these results. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Rothstein. Anyone else?
I'll just say that some of the things that stood out to me in particular were the way that we put the numbers together. And I know that you did address it in the presentation today. Thank you for that time, because I know it does take time to divide up the statistics the way that we need to. But I do appreciate that in the end we did include in that breakup of how the data is by race and by the ELLs, and I think that that's very important. I also think that the end part, refining our district goals. I think that we've spoken in depth about the things that we haven't tried yet and the new things that we're looking to get into and start, we're going in a good direction for our district, for the students that have been impacted, not just by the pandemic, but by just not being able to be addressed properly due to different factors that we are looking at now.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta.
Sure.
No, I'll just say that again, I think to really suffix what's also been said around the point of data and accountability, it's good to see a shift back to a data-driven analysis and approach and really building and coalescing around making sure that it is the data that drives our instructional practice, the accountability of the supervisors, and engagement with parents about how they can support their child's learning. So I think hearing the presentation tonight, obviously exceeding the state numbers is insufficient for communities such as West Orange, but the commitment of the district to create goals of its own that exceed that and really reflect the ideals and aspirations of families for their children, I think is really important. So I commend you and your staff, Ms. Martino, Dr. Schoen, and the board for its commitment to ensure that every child has a good education, an excellent education in West Orange. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. We don't really have any public here tonight, so otherwise we could open that up for comments from the public. But we will thank you again for your time and all the energy you put into this. I know it can't be easy taking all of this data and kind of condensing it into a single presentation, and there's a lot of really good information in here, and I look forward to seeing the results of all of the interventions you have planned, in the coming year. So thank you so much for all of your time and efforts.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll now move on to our resolutions. I would like to have a motion to approve the personnel items A1 and A2.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Board members, do you have any discussion on these items? Seeing none, Ms. Flowers, would you take the roll call?
Ms. Huerta,
Yes.
Mr. Rock,
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson,
Yes.
Vice President Rothstein,
Yes.
President Tunnicliff.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, before we close, I just wanted to remind the public that tomorrow is the school district is closed for Election Day. So get out there and vote West Orange. And we will also be closed on Thursday and Friday for the New Jersey Education Association Teachers Convention. So our teachers hopefully are going down to Atlantic City to get some new ideas and share some knowledge. So we wish them well. And our next regular board meeting will be at 7:30 p.m. on November 21st, 2022. This meeting will be held right here in the high school LMC. And we will not be going into executive session at the close of this meeting. And there will be no further business discussed or no additional action taken. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.